Pop star, composer, songwriter, and recording artist, John Winston Lennon was born October 9, 1940 in Liverpool during a German air raid in World War II. When he was just 4 years old, Lennon's parents separated and he ended up living with his Aunt Mimi. John's father was a merchant seaman. He was not present at his son's birth and did not see a lot of his son when he was small. Lennon's mother, Julia, remarried but visited John and Mimi regularly. She taught John how to play the banjo and the piano and purchased his first guitar. John was devastated when Julia was fatally struck by a car driven off by an off-duty police officer in July 1958. Her death was one of the most traumatic events in his life. As a child, John was a prankster and he enjoyed getting in trouble. As a boy and young adult, John enjoyed drawing grotesque figures and cripples. John's schoolmaster thought that he could go to an art school for college, since he did not get good grades in school but had an artistic talent. At 16, Elvis Presley's explosion onto the rock music scene inspired John to create the skiffle band called the Quarrymen, named after his school. Lennon met Paul McCartney at a church fete on July 6, 1957. John soon invited Paul to join the group, and they eventually formed the most successful songwriting partnership in musical history. McCartney introduced George Harrison to Lennon the following year, and he and an art college buddy, Stuart Sutcliffe, also joined Lennon's band. Always in need of a drummer, the group finally settled on Pete Best in 1960. The first recording they made was Buddy Holly's That'll Be the Day, in mid-1958. In fact, it was Holly's group, the Crickets, that inspired the band to change its name. John would later joke that he had a vision when he was 12 years old. A man appeared on a flaming pie and said unto him, "From this day on you are Beatles with an A." The Beatles were discovered by Brian Epstein in 1961 at the Cavern Club, where they were performing on a regular basis. As their new manager, Epstein secured a record contract with EMI. With a new drummer, Ringo Starr, Richard Starkey, and George Martin as producer, the group released their first single, Love Me Do, in October 1962. It peaked on the British charts at number 17. Lennon wrote the group's follow-up single, Please Please Me, inspired primarily by Rob Orbison, but also fed by John's infatuation with the pun and Bing Crosby's famous Please Lend Your Little Ears to Me, Please. The song topped the charts in Britain. The Beatles went on to become the most popular band in Britain with the release mega hits like She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand. In 1964, the Beatles became the first band to break out on the big United States, beginning with their appearance on TV's The Ed Sullivan Show on February 9, 1964. Beatlemania launched a British invasion on rock bands in the U.S., which included the Rolling Stones and the Kinks. After Sullivan, the Beatles returned to Britain to film their first movie, A Hard Day's Night, and prepared for their first world tour. When the Beatles broke up, Lennon released Plastic Ono Band with a raw minimalist sound that followed Primal Scream Therapy. In 1971, he followed up with Imagine, the most commercially successful and critically acclaimed of all John Lennon's post-Beatles efforts. The title track was later listed as the third all-time best song by Rolling Stones magazine. Peace and Love, however, was not always on Lennon's agenda. Imagine also included the track How Do You Sleep, a nasty response to veiled messages at Lennon in some of McCartney's solo recordings. Later, the former songwriting duo buried the hatchet, but never formally worked together again. Lennon and Ono moved to the U.S. in September 1971, but were constantly threatened with deportation by the Nixon administration. Lennon was told he was being kicked out of the country because of his 1968 marijuana conviction in Britain, but Lennon believed the true reason was his activism against the unpopular Vietnam War. Documents later proved him correct. 2 years after Nixon resigned, Lennon was granted permanent U.S. residency in 1976. Lennon performed at Madison Square Garden to benefit mentally handicapped children and continued to promote peace while battling to stay in the U.S. That immigration battle took a toll on the Lennon marriage, and in fall of 1973, they separated. John went to Los Angeles, where he partied and took a mistress, May Payne. He still managed to release hit albums such as Mind Games, Walls, and Bridges, and Rock and Roll, and collaborated with David Bowie and Elton John. In the end, Yoko and Lennon reconciled, and she gave birth to their only child, Sean, on Lennon's 35th birthday. John decided to leave the music business to raise his son and become a house husband. In 1980, Lennon returned to the music world with the album Double Fantasy, featuring the hit song Just Like, Starting Over. Unfortunately, just a few weeks after its release, Lennon was shot by a deranged fan in front of his apartment complex in New York. Lennon died of the age of 40 at the Roosevelt Hospital on December 8, 1980, after receiving multiple gunshots in the back. His death affected millions of people, record sales soared, and he continues to be admired by new generations of fans.